Morning, everybody. It's a little subject I've been wanting to talk about. I really wanted to talk about yesterday, and just wasn't enough sunlight. I was too busy to talk about it. A lot of people have been asking me about this recently. How does one go about being recognized as clergy? I hear people say to me, "Oh, you're an official rabbi." That's something like I hear in the Hasidic community sometimes. You're an official rabbi. What does it mean? You're an official rabbi. And the same would be whatever type of clergy a person might need to be for various reasons. What would be the reason someone would want to be clergy? In addition to obviously leading a congregation, a synagogue, a church, a mosque, whatever, a temple, whatever, as some kind of religious group, or some kind of congregation that you're going to lead. That's one aspect of it, but there's more to it. There are certain things, particularly what I would say in our interactions with the secular world, that one can find this to be beneficial for various reasons. So what could those be? One would be to be wedding officiant. That's probably one of the most common reasons why a person would seek to be recognized on some level as an ordained member of clergy. So how does that work exactly? I've made many videos on this subject. It varies from state to state. The examples vary. I would say one of the most difficult locations to be recognized as a clergy for the purposes of performing weddings is New York City. New York City requires a level of registration and requires one to go through more hoops than most other places. That being said, some places that don't require registration still have rather complicated laws. And so each state, and sometimes people don't even know the laws. Even you could call a clerk and they won't even really know the laws themselves. But these are the types of things that go on in different states. So New York City requires you to have some sort of a letter from a congregation, or they give another option, is that if your ordaining body produces an annual directory or some other type of book or something of the people who were ordained, whether it was those who were ordained that year or those who were ordained all together or so forth. That is also, as far as I remember, might have changed since then, but at least at one point when I knew about this, that was sufficient in New York City. So I remember when I was ordained at Lander College, they gave out a little booklet with pictures of all of the ordinees, all the musmachim, we would say in Hebrew. And so that would be, meaning you take it, you have a photocopy of the front page of the book and a copy of your page, and you present that. That should be sufficient in New York City if your ordaining body provides something along those lines. I've got something on my mind, so that's why I'm pausing a lot. But otherwise, you need some kind of a letter to be eligible in New York City. You need some kind of a letter from a congregation. Generally, the letter will say something about the congregation, and you can go on the New York City website and see exactly what needs to be said. What type of congregation it is, where it's located, how often they meet, when it was founded, the purpose of the founding. When you say the purpose of the founding, for example, it's a simple thing. In my case, it would say this, congregation Kol Emes was founded as an Orthodox synagogue. That's the purpose of the founding, to function as an Orthodox synagogue, and that's sufficient. And it was founded in 1964, and it's located in 4811 Patterson Avenue in Richmond, Virginia. I still remember all that. And that was sufficient. And then that's one letter describing the congregation, and the second letter will say that we recognize Rabbi Kolakowski as our rabbi and his clergy, and he is eligible to perform weddings with the permission of our congregation and so forth. And then a copy of the ordination and a translation of the ordination if it's in a foreign language. Although the ordination really isn't as important as the letter from the congregation, you could actually have a letter from the congregation without an ordination, and that's sufficient. And when I was a rabbi at Kol Emes, one of my friends who did, come to the shul and daven for the Amud, maybe laned a little bit, maybe laned the Haftarah, we gave him a letter saying that he is an associate cantor in the congregation, and New York City accepted that. And that's something, that really is what I want to bring out here, is that rabbi is not the only title the Jewish world has. Cantor is accepted in New York City, and it doesn't necessarily need to be some kind of an ordination, just a letter of recommendation and so forth. And this is what I've spoken about before concerning the question of women serving in a clergy role. And I think we get confused when we hear clergy. We assume it means that you're going to be a rabbi and paskin shailas, and that's not in what I understand in the Orthodox Jewish world a traditional function of a woman. But that being said, a rebbitzin serves in a clergy role and might actually be a preacher and a teacher to women as well. And it's a different type of clergy role than a rabbi. And, we should recognize the rebbitzin or as some kind of a minister. Doesn't necessarily have to be someone who's married to a rabbi necessarily. You can give a title, because really rebbitzin doesn't really mean rabbi's wife as much as it means in Yiddish the female equivalent of a rabbi. And traditionally in Yiddish, somewhat might be jokingly, you see a very frum woman say, "Oh, she's a rebbitzin," "Why she's a rebbitzin," that type of a language exists. And so I don't mean to change anything traditionally in the Jewish world, but as far as the ability to get a job in the secular world, I do see a place for women to have some type of a title that can get them a position in chaplaincy, particularly. As someone who works in chaplaincy, I believe there is a place for the rebbitzin or other Orthodox Jewish women. You might want to use the title reverend. I'm fine with that, both for men and women. I mean, in colonial times in America, the Jewish clergy were called ministers, or they would have a title reverend. Quite often someone who was a sheichet, a ritual slaughterer, a moil, a ritual circumciser, would carry a title reverend if they were not necessarily a rabbi. If they didn't, hold the title of rabbi, they would still hold the title in English of reverend. So that's noteworthy. That title should be available in the Jewish world, and a cantor also would be considered minister, have the title reverend. Generally, in the Hebrew title for the clergy in the colonial synagogues was chazan, and they would use the title reverend. But sometimes, even if they weren't technically ordained rabbis, but they were chazanim, shochtim, and moelim, and they knew how to paskin shilas, certainly issues from Orach Chaim and Yeridea, and they might even be a sefer. They might have all of these skills. And therefore, they would give a title reverend, and might colloquial call them rabbi, but and some of them would be big Talmidei Chachamim, particularly I'm thinking of Yisrael Ber Kershid, who was a Talmud of Reb Nosson Adler, and on his kever it says the Reverend Israel Ber Kershid. It doesn't say rabbi, and it says he was the chazan of the congregation. So the similar type of thing, would be for, people like the Reverend Isaac Leeser and the Reverend Gershon Mendel Sheshis. They might still be called rabbi colloquially, even if they weren't ordained rabbis. I mean, the first musmach in America was from Rice in Baltimore. He was the first one who technically held a title rabbi, but still, there are historical records where Reverend Gershon Mendel Sheshis is called rabbi. But again, on his tombstone it says reverend, and even rabbis in England, I think even still to this day, they'll say, the very reverend Rabbi Doctor so and so. I know certainly in the 20th century that was something that we saw, but chief rabbis of England, would be, the very reverend Rabbi Doctor, and all the Rosh Hashanah afterwards. It doesn't necessarily mean we're talking about people who are the very reverend, but even if you're just the regular reverend, it's also worthwhile. And these are things that should be in mind, when we're talking about these discussions of women clergy in the Orthodox Jewish world, but also in general, with men who might not be rabbis, but they want to work as chaplains and so forth, and they're regular Orthodox Jews who have, a good education, Jewish education, and they can certainly function well in chaplaincy if they have the talents that are needed for that. So again, the question is, which titles are needed? It doesn't really matter what title. I mean, I would compare it, in the Catholic Church, you have nuns. Nuns are quite often working in chaplaincy. You have deacons. And, deacons, they're not a paid position in the church, but they can have a good job, nice full-time government job, or a part-time contract or whatever it is, serving as a chaplain in a prison or in a hospital and so forth. These are the type of things that we should have in mind the same way. Somebody has as a gabbai. A gabbai is essentially a deacon. In the Arabic-speaking churches, a deacon is called a shamas. I'm not sure how it's pronounced in Arabic. It's pretty much the same as the Hebrew word shamish. Shamish b'kodesh. It's essentially the same idea as a deacon. And so then we could ask the same question: if somebody has a title of the gabbai, which generally they'll translate that as a sexton or a beadle, beadle. Again, is that sufficient for someone to serve in a chaplaincy role if they receive, good chaplaincy education? I would say yes. And I'm not, as much as I want to protect the rabbinate, but I recognize, there are certain people, they're looking for a job. They might be retired from some other position and they don't have a pension or anything. They might have had their own business and they have some kind of a position in the synagogue as a gabbai. The same thing, how in the church someone might have a position as a deacon, and why not? Why wouldn't it's very common in chaplaincy to have deacons serve in chaplaincy. I had no idea how common it was. And the same thing, a deacon can perform a wedding legally. Although within the church there's different issues, but generally what I understand in the Catholic Church is that someone is a deacon. A couple, they're going to be married by a deacon. They're still going to have their marriage blessed by a priest privately, but at the public ceremony, the deacon will be performing the ceremony. Not sure who signs the marriage license there, but really, technically, either the priest or the deacon could sign the marriage license. And so, too, I'm not necessarily talking about Jewish weddings, but talking about someone wants to start a wedding business, or they want to, sign the marriage license for a friend of theirs. The example I'm going to give like this is Jared Kushner was, being interviewed on some show, and he joked around. He said, "Oh, you're getting married? I can do the ceremony because," he said, "I'm an internet Unitarian." I think what he meant was that he's from the Universal Life Church. He was ordained. But the thing was, he didn't need to do that. If he ever davened for the Amud at his shul, the shul could give him a letter saying that he's an associate cantor, and then he could carry the title reverend and perform the wedding for his friend. It didn't necessarily need to be. He didn't have to go to the website of the church in Modesto, California, to be ordained, even though it's free and everything. He could have kept it in the family, And the same thing, if you're part of a particular organization or something, you're already a member in a church or a synagogue or a mosque or something, they can authorize you to do certain things, and in general, that could mean that you're authorized to do more than just in your own faith. Again, it depends on your church, or your synagogue, whatever. Some people might be comfortable with it, some people might not. But, for me, that's something I've done for years, as a legitimate rabbi and a congregational rabbi. I never saw any issue with signing a marriage license between a Jew and a non-Jew. I'm sorry, God forbid, chas v'shalom. I would not do that. I'm saying between two non-Jews. Between a Jew and a non-Jew, I don't. And I know some people might find that offensive. But two people who are not Jewish, I don't see any issue signing a marriage license and even saying a few words at the ceremony and asking, do you take? It's something I've done hundreds and hundreds of times over the past 12 years. Never chas v'shalom for a Jew and a non-Jew. That I wouldn't do. But between two non-Jews, why not? Slipped the tongue there. I didn't feel really. But chaplaincy is an issue that people have been asking me about particularly. There are chaplaincy programs. There's the New York State Chaplains Task Force. I'm a member there. I gotta go to Dollar General. But I can pass by there. These types of issues that come up. So, because I'm not going to make it by 8:15 anyway. So, might as well take care of business over here. So again, these are some of the issues that people ask about, but it's when it comes to chaplaincy, there are other things. A major issue generally for chaplaincy jobs is the CPE credits. Again, that's probably more important than being ordained, is do you have clinical pastoral education? It certainly goes well together with being ordained. And many seminaries have it as part of their program. But you can have it actually without being ordained. For many positions, it's enough. Some chaplaincy positions also require a master's degree, Masters of Divinity. Where can you get one that they will recognize? These are complicated issues when it comes to chaplaincy. Where's the right place to go to get chaplaincy credentials, to get a master's degree, and so forth. It depends really on what job you want to get. Some places will say, well, we'll recognize certain things as equivalency and so forth. They're not always so strict about a lot of these things. But these are things to have in mind. These are things to consider. So, thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. Comment. And we'll see you all later. I have a lot more to say on this subject, but I'm just too distracted today. Thank you. Be well.